his bio in here, so I'm going to do that. No.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks very much, Mike.
You're welcome. We've got dueling microphones now. We could have a duet. I do want to say that Eric Cowperthwaite is, I don't know, we met, I don't remember. Actually, like physically met only last year, I think.
Yeah.
But we have a common background in the Army and specifically in armor and tanks. So he was a tank commander. I was a tank driver.
I won't hold it against
He had to make decisions. I just did what people said. We weren't in the same tank, but both Desert Storm vets, so we have just a whole lot of background together there, and it just brought us as friends really quick, even though we were only talking on Facebook and all that good stuff. So, but Eric is, with all of that stuff behind him being said, he's a ex-CISO. He decided to move to the dark side and now works for Core Security, but don't hold that against him.
Why does it have to be dark?
Because I'm on the dark side too. I'm a vendor.
Well,
I can say that. But seriously, one of the most respected guys in the industry. I say that with no BS at all. Very, very respected, knows his stuff really well. And as a CISO, decided to go into the vendor world. But he's using that knowledge that he had as a CISO to do a lot of good things in the security world, and maybe have a vendor that is not too vendorish. So Eric can tell you all the other stuff, but I want to introduce our closing keynote, Eric Cowperthwaite.
Thanks, buddy. Thank God he didn't read that PR written bio. It's in the thing. I will tell you a little bit about my background just because I think there's some interesting things there that are worth sharing. But this is really all about the 10 years I spent in the Army and how it actually prepared me to become an information security practitioner, which may seem a little odd to you, but I think at the end we'll figure that out. A couple of people have asked me how close or far away they should sit from the stage. I promise there will be no pyrotechnics or explosions or anything of that nature. So I went to basic training in 1985. You can read the rest of that pretty easily, but that tank right there sat out in front of Fort Knox at the main gate. And it's the first thing I saw that was military-like on August, I think it was 19th, 1985, at about 1 a.m. in the morning as the bus I was on rolled through the gate. It really is kind of like what you see in the movies. Your bus pulls up, a really big, really loud-voiced guy with a Smokey the Bear hat comes on the bus and starts yelling at you, and it's 1 in the morning. And then when we got off the bus, they proceeded to feed us breakfast, which we didn't really want, make us make our beds, and then we told us we could go to sleep. That was probably about 2:30 or so, and then woke us up at 4:30. So that was my first day in the Army. I left the military in 1996, went to school, used a GI Bill, went to work for EDS in 1997, so you might say I never really left the Army if you know much about EDS. I went to work for Providence Health and Services in 2006, but in between, in those 10 years at EDS, I was a senior system engineer, a solution architect, a managing consultant in their U.S. consulting practice. And I went from originally being a system engineer to, by the end of all of that, I was a security guy, and it was sort of by accident. I didn't plan on becoming an information security practitioner. That wasn't my goal. But a lot of my things I had learned along the way sort of set me up for it. And so when I accidentally discovered the world of information security, I said, hey, I actually know what I'm doing here, even though I, maybe didn't appear to at first. I went to work for Providence Health and Services, which is a large Catholic healthcare system, as their CISO in 2006. You may remember them because they were the first healthcare organization to ever sign a resolution agreement with Health and Human Services. I was the guy hired because of the incident that led to the resolution agreement, so it's not my fault. In basic training, one of the very first things that you learn is what are called the Army General Orders. Anybody been in the Army? Can you still recite the General Orders? Yeah. I will guard everything within the limits of my post, quit my post only when properly relieved. Well, if you're an information security practitioner, I'm going to start abbreviating that to just say if you're a security person, because that's a little complex. Isn't there a lot of similarity there in what you should be doing? If you turn that into civilian words. The same thing, so number 2, I will obey my special orders. Special orders are things above and beyond the general orders. So maybe you're guarding an ammunition supply point and nobody with a lit cigarette can come within 50 yards of it because there's ammunition in there. That's a special order. Okay, so if there's something unique about the systems that you're protecting over and above the normal stuff that you need to do, that would be a special order. And perform all your duties in a military manner. So that means be professional, right? Whether that's how you dress, how you behave, how you interact with people. The next one seems pretty straightforward as well, but I learned that it's not enough to just do my job. I need to tell people when things go wrong and make sure that they're aware of the things that went wrong. The commander of the relief is the guy in charge of the guard force. So it would be your boss, right? Does that make sense? That was like taught to us to the point where I can't forget it 30 years later. But it informed me throughout the entire rest of my professional life. Anybody seen the movie Stripes? Okay, so Stripes was filmed at Fort Knox. So it was kind of weird when I went to basic training there and it looked like a movie set. But do you remember at the beginning of the movie, sort of at the beginning when they're introducing everybody in the unit and Drill Sergeant Holka is sitting there and Bill Murray decides to be the typical comedian that he is and says everybody needs a big toe, right? Well, the point he's making, funny as it is that you have to have somebody in charge. You have to have a leader. Not necessarily the guy who points at you and orders you to do stuff and then watches while you do stuff, but someone who's part of the group, who can lead the group in the right direction and make sure that they're achieving the right goals and objectives. So we learned that pretty quick too with our drill sergeants, that there was somebody in charge of the group, but you do need a big toe. Army life. All right, so the guy in the center of that picture is me. And this is the first tank that I was the tank commander of instead of the driver or the gunner or the loader. I'm the guy in charge now. And my lieutenant told me he had seen my black flag. And he told me there is no way you were putting that thing up on your tank. And so I waited till he was off at the company commander's briefing and couldn't see what I was doing and put the flag up. And before he could come back and tell me to take it down, I was really lucky. A major, the battalion executive officer, came by and thought it was awesome. And so I got to leave my pirate flag up. I learned in the Army life is not exactly what you think it is. Okay, we don't spend all our time marching around and doing push-ups. Right? It's a job. It's a profession like any other, with some differences. One of which being that you wear the same uniform and cut your hair the same way. But you also work really hard and you play really hard. And I learned that a really solid work ethic combined with some great time off with my friends was important in my professional life. And it should be important in yours too. Don't make that time off so much so that, you end up alcoholic or arrested or something, but enjoy your life as well as your work. OPSEC, the term OPSEC, you hear it a lot in information security. I learned OPSEC in about first week of January of 1986 when I was stationed in Germany, and we got our first OPSEC briefing. Don't sit in the bar with your buddies drinking and talk about stuff you shouldn't be talking about because there's ears listening. That was a huge part of Army life. And it should be a huge part of your life. You get social engineered all the time and don't even realize it by people who are targeting your companies. Operational security is huge. And finally, be a pirate. Seriously, put up the pirate flag. Be an individual. Be a little rebellious. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that. The Army taught me to be an individual, funny enough. And it taught me to be a little bit rebellious and a little bit different, and I was successful because of it. Right? Captain Jack, I'm not talking about a pirate who goes out and kills people, okay? And steals things. And Captain Jack, there's a scene in the first Pirates of the Caribbean that got cut, where we find out that Captain Jack Sparrow got in trouble with the East India Trading Company because he freed a bunch of their slaves. And that's why he was tattooed as a pirate by the East India Trading Company. They should have left that scene in the movie. But he's a strong individual, right? He stands up for what he believes in. He follows the code. And no, it's not really what you'd call guidelines and actual rules. The code is the code. If you have a code of ethics, live by it. We talk about that all the time in information security, being an ethical hacker, agreeing to abide by the ethics of whatever certification body you got your certification from, etc. It's actually really important. Because when you have the keys to the kingdom, we have to be able to trust you. And we can't. And we're not always going to see what it is you're doing. So when you're out of our sight, we have to know that you're following the code. That you're living and working ethically. The same as a soldier has to follow the code of the Army, the Army values. It's okay to dare to be different as well. To run up a black flag, to cut your hair a little different, to approach problems a little bit differently. Not every problem requires the exact same approach from every person. And be ruthless. I don't mean ruthless in a murderous way, but ruthless in doing all of those things. If this is what you believe in, do it to the best of your ability and let nothing prevent you from succeeding. And Captain Jack always survives to fight another day, right? Sometimes things are going to go wrong. It's okay. They go wrong sometimes. This picture, so a lot of these pictures I'm going to show you I took. This picture is what was called the Iron Curtain. This is a town in East Germany. That river is the border between East and West Germany. That wall is not there to keep the West Germans and the American army out. That wall is there because they were keeping the people who lived in that town from getting to West Germany. Thus, the last bullet point, bad guys are bad. I learned that, right? Not just not so nice people. There's some really bad guys in the world. I learned a lot about defense because we were worried about, so I was in a unit that had, I was in the 11th Cavalry Regiment in Germany, and we were deployed right on the East German border. And our job was literally to patrol the border and see if the Soviets were going to invade West Germany or not. I'm kind of like the firewall in IDS. Think of me that way. But what I learned was about defense in depth. Now, when I first got there, my commander briefed all of his new soldiers, and there were probably about 30 of us. And we're sitting in the room, and he gets done with being an officer and doing all his normal commander briefing stuff, and then he goes down the line of us 30 or so soldiers and counts off 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, all the way down. Okay, everybody who I gave a number 2 to, stand up. So I stood up, along with 14, 15, whatever other guys, and he said, okay, here's what we know. Because of the role that we have right here on the border, within about 8 minutes after Russian tanks cross the border, you guys are all dead. That was pretty encouraging. But then he went on to explain that our job was to, A, let everybody else know they were coming, and B, slow them down so that the rest of the military could react to the situation. And so that the reserves could be brought to the front and put into battle and be able to stop what we were facing. Because you couldn't put everybody right up on the border, right? That would be kind of crazy. In a normal, because then you'd have like 1 million people standing on the border and they couldn't do their daily job, take care of their tanks, train with their rifles, etc., etc. But they had to be able to get up there fairly quickly and do their job. So somebody has to be up there patrolling the border. You have to build defenses in depth. You have to have a way to get somebody to respond to the incident quickly. Does this sound familiar? So those are things I learned in the physical world, but they apply to how we should do information security too. We need to know when something bad is happening. And there may be a negative outcome when that bad thing happens, but if we can detect it quickly and we can bring in our additional capability, the rest of our security team, other technology people, the right tools, etc., we may be able to stop it right there instead of letting it spread and grow and get worse. You don't want to be Anthem with bad guys in your network for 18 months before you know about it, right? That's my tank. I'm kind of proud of that. I was a tank commander. They were taking some publicity pictures. They took pictures of my tank firing at night. It was kind of cool. They gave me a copy of it. Shooting tank guns. I learned a lot of cool stuff from shooting tank guns. So a tank crew is 4 men inside a 60-ton monster that is designed, so we've all heard, guns are designed to kill. Well, tanks are really designed to kill. Way beyond guns, okay? And they really don't care who they kill. You can get very, very badly injured inside the tank. If you get in the way of the path of recoil of the gun weighs 3 tons and it comes back at about 500 feet per second. and it recoils about this far inside the turret. So if it hits you, you're pretty much toast. Right? So you got to stay out of the way of the gun. Well, sometimes you're really tired. It was late at night here. Sometimes, maybe you're part of a security operations center, or you're working on an incident and it's 2 a.m. and you're really tired. You got to figure out how to, during those times, how to work through that, how to make sure you get sleep somewhere in there, how to use coffee and caffeine and walking around and food and conversation with other people to keep yourself alert. We had to learn to do that. And in security, there will be times where you may have to do that. The other thing we learned, because of both the need to do it right, because you want to hit the target that's a mile away, as well as not get yourself hurt in the process, is you do things the same way every time. And the loader loads the gun exactly the same way every time. For example. And you have to work as a team. Each person has their own responsibility within the team, but if the tank commander tries to be the gunner, he disrupts what the team is doing. Right? You have a gunner for a reason, with responsibilities for a reason. You have the tank commander who's supposed to spot the targets and control the crew. The driver drives, loader loads, gunner guns. That seems simple. But when people start trying to do each other's jobs because they want to do it really, really well, what happens? They disrupt the interaction of the crew. Have you ever seen that in your professional life where, a manager jumps in and starts doing the work that's supposed to belong to an engineer or an analyst because the manager thinks that they can do it better or they want it done faster or whatever, and it's very disruptive to the team? Or you do it laterally or what have you. There's a team for a reason. There's also, in the process of shooting a tank, of going through this drill called gunnery, there are things you do, like you bore sight the main gun so that the sights and the gun are pointed at the same place. Because if the sights are pointed here and the gun's pointed here, it wouldn't work well, right? So you have this thing called prepare to fire. And it's a long checklist of stuff you do. And then you have another checklist of stuff you do called during fire. And another that you do after firing, like you clean the main gun after you fire, right? Just like you would clean a rifle. Well, if you don't follow those checklists, then things go wrong. When you're doing incident response, for example, you should have a checklist that you follow and do it the same way every time. Because otherwise you forget, especially under stress. And let's be honest, most information security work is under stress most of the time, right? So checklistize as much of your work as you can, especially the stressful stuff, and do it the same way, following your checklist. That's my tank too. I'm not so proud of that picture. Because what happened is it was a late night movement. We were moving about 10 tanks down the road. And my driver started falling asleep because it was 3 in the morning and I didn't realize my driver was falling asleep until the tank drifted off the road, slid down a very steep slope into a bunch of soft dirt. And what happened is the track got pulled up under the tank and off of the road wheels, which are the wheel-looking things. So it's 3 in the morning. My tank can't go anywhere, and I have to repair this whole thing. I was a sergeant by then, and I learned a lot of things, not just from this incident, but from being a sergeant in charge of a tank crew. One of the most important things I learned, and I think it really, really applies in information security, why do we do capture the flag? But you have to train as you fight. You can't prepare yourself. So if you're going to be involved in information security and you prepare yourself by training yourself for things that are not actual reality in information security. So if you train yourself to secure a Mac OS based laptop, and yet your job is going to be all Windows based laptops, that's kind of you're not training as you're going to fight, right? You're going to have to forgive my language. The 4 P's of planning, and these are not good P's. Piss poor prior planning guarantees that you will fail. The fact that I didn't have a plan for how to check on my driver's state at 3 a.m. as we're driving down the road and make sure that he's not falling asleep led to this outcome. It's not his fault, it was my fault. I didn't plan ahead for what might happen. You have to know who's in charge. So once this incident happens, you create a recovery team, kind of like an incident management team, right? And the recovery team has one person in charge. And normally it would be the tank commander, and it was in this case. But anybody else who shows up, no matter what their rank is not in charge. And they don't get to start sticking their nose in and try to say, this is how we should do it. So when I ran incident response teams as a CISO, I put one of my people in charge, and then I resisted the urge to ever try to run that team myself. I would talk to the incident manager. But I wouldn't go jump in the middle of the team and try to direct them to do things because they're dealing with a very stressful situation and they should only have one person directing their operations. In this case, when you're dealing with this, that track weighs 8,800 pounds and it's under an immense amount of pressure and you have to take the track apart, take it off the tank, put it back on the tank correctly. I have a picture of us doing that too. I just didn't have, I was going to run out of slides. But that's a very dangerous job, as you can imagine. 8,800 pounds of steel and rubber under high pressure that has to be taken apart, put back together. You wouldn't want anybody else sticking their nose into how to do that, right? Same thing with incident response. So it boils down to people are the key. Good, well-trained professional people who know what they're doing, who want to be part of the team. People, more than anything else, was the key to our success in the Army. And it's the key to success in information security as well. More than any other profession I've ever seen. Next most important is processes, right? So when you are dealing with this, you have to have a process you follow. Well, the same thing is true when you're dealing with security, whether it's how to secure a system, or how to respond to an incident, or how to interact with the technology operations people, or et cetera, et cetera. Processes are very important because processes allow us to achieve appropriate outcomes. Don't let them become your bureaucracy, though. Let them be the way. They're not the code, they're guidelines. Sorry, little Captain Jack joke. But seriously, processes are very important. And finally, equipment. You have to have the right equipment. If you're trying to take that track apart with the toolbox that you keep at home to work on stuff around the house, you're going to have a problem. If you're trying to conduct a penetration test and you don't have the appropriate equipment, like dictionary password, or password dictionaries, Kali Linux, maybe Impact Pro if you happen to work for my company, social engineering toolkit. If you don't have the right tools to conduct a penetration test, you're probably not going to be very successful. So I'm a sergeant, right? But I didn't just stand around pointing at people saying, do this and do that. That's me, and I'm in there working on the tank myself. Leaders are part of the team, and they need to work right alongside the team. If your leader doesn't get in and get his hands or her hands dirty with you, or if you're the leader and you don't get your hands dirty with your team, it's a problem. How much respect will that leader get? This is a little bit of an eye chart, but this is the Army's planning factors. Mission, enemy, troops, terrain, and time. So when they're creating a combat plan, these are the 5 things they take into account. With a little bit of modification, they're probably the 5 things you should take into account when you're thinking about how to build security plans for your systems. So the mission is the objectives that you have to accomplish. Take a hill, defend a hill, make sure this bridge is kept intact. The commander's intent, that's the guy above you who says, my intent is that we will do this in this fashion. We'll use a dynamic defense, or we'll use a static defense, or we'll lead with our tanks when we attack, or the infantry will precede the tanks to try to clear minefields. It's all about what how the commander wants to achieve the mission. So this is how does the leader who's in charge of this security operation, whether it be securing a server, doing incident response, better identity and access management, whatever the project is, they have some kind of intent in mind that they want to accomplish. And then there's mission essential tasks. One of the biggest things in the mission that we forget about, or that we lose sight of, is there are tasks that are absolutely critical to putting in our new identity and access management system, and then there's other stuff. In project management, when you start doing the other stuff that's not mission essential, we call that scope creep, right? So does the military. Scope creep is really bad because it distracts you from the essential tasks required to accomplish your objective. The enemy could be the bad guys. It could be inertia in the organization. It could be change management. It could be all sorts of things. But you need to know what the enemy is and how the enemy can oppose you and get in the way and prevent you from accomplishing your mission. How many bad guys are there? What kind of tools and tactics will they be using against you? Are they script kiddies? Or are they employed by a nation state with tools at least as capable as core security has? I don't know how many of you guys know core security, but we have very, very capable penetration testing tools. So anyway, nation states often craft equipment that good too, right? So what are you facing? Script kiddies? Nation state? Non-government actors? Criminals? An organization that is resistant to change? Troops refers to your own stuff. Who are the key people involved? Your project manager, your CISO, the IT operations director, etc. What are the strengths and weaknesses of your team? Do you have good morale? I run into security teams a lot of times that don't have good morale. You laughed at me. But I also run into security teams that have great morale. So it all depends. But it's important to know that and understand that, because then you can plan for that and take it into account. Terrain is more like the systems you have to deal with. Think of it that way, right? But in the Army, it's, is there cover and concealment that I can use, etc. And time is very, very important. How much time do I have to prepare and plan for what I'm going to do? Or do I just have to go do it? Do I have a chance to practice? Can I rehearse what I'm going to do before I have to do it for real? Could I back out the change in case something goes wrong? What are my critical time checkpoints? When do I have to start this activity? When should I have it finished by? During the course of the activity, should I be at a certain stage in my work at a certain point in time? So with a little bit of effort, you can adopt these. They may look very similar to some project management things you've learned over the course of the years. Sometimes your mission changes. So I joined the Army in 1985 during the Cold War, right? And I thought my being in the Army was all about defending us against communism and possible nuclear war and that kind of stuff. And then the Soviet Union went away in 1989, and I'm like, very different world. We didn't realize how different it was going to be at that moment, but I quickly did in 1990 when my unit was sent to Saudi Arabia to defend against the invasion from Iraq that happened. That's me sitting in that is not an army tent. That's a tent we bought in Saudi Arabia because we didn't take any tents of our own. But I'm sitting in a tent in Saudi Arabia, and it's about December 20th or so. And that was a very different mission than the Cold War mission that we originally had. In information security, not that long ago, our mission was to make sure our email servers couldn't be compromised by things like by email viruses, and to make sure that our users weren't being overwhelmed by spam, and to do a lot of compliance work and check off that we had installed antivirus and so forth. That really was the information security mission not that long ago. Today, the again you laugh, but I'm right. The mission has radically changed, and we have to be prepared for that radical change. We have to realize that we have gone from a compliance-focused mission to a very risk-focused mission dealing with bad guys who have figured out how to beat us on every front. The mission's changed, and we haven't quite caught up to that yet. Checking the compliance boxes is not going to do it. So the U.S. Army used to stand, on the border in Germany to defend against the Soviet Union. And it has an entirely different mission today, right? And if you couldn't adapt to that, that was a problem. So that Christmas in the desert sort of opened my eyes to the fact that the mission changes. This is a T-90 main battle tank, which is the mainstay of the Russian army. So the bad guys we faced, it turns out, although they had different levels of capability, they all used more or less similar equipment. Whether it was the Soviet army or the Iraqi army, they were using pretty much the same equipment and the same tactics. They were using the same equipment and the same tactics because they were successful. Guess what? Your adversaries are using the same tactics and pretty much the same equipment over and over, whether they're criminals, or nation-state actors, or terrorists, or hacktivists. They're using the same gear and the same tactics. And in fact, their tactics are working. That's why they're doing it. Right? We all know how they break in. We all know how they breach you, right? Everybody knows social engineering, compromise the browser, take control of the operating system, probe the network until they find another system they can pivot to, etc., right? 80% of the time, that's how they do it. Why are they doing it that way over and over and over again? Because they're winning. So, there was a guy, the Duke of Wellington, and another guy, Napoleon Bonaparte. And they fought. They were the respective leaders, military leaders. On the French side, Napoleon, and on the British side, Wellington, during about a 15-year period of time where the British, Germans, and Russians were fighting France in what's now called the Napoleonic Wars. And for a long time, the French were successful, very, very successful. And every time they fought a battle with the British, Russians, or Germans, they used the exact same tactics on the battlefield. Why? Because the tactics Napoleon had created were succeeding. And he won every battle until he lost. And he lost when Wellington had figured out how to defeat his tactics. And in the last battle that the two sides fought, Waterloo in 1815, after the battle was over and Wellington had won, someone asked him how he won, and his answer was, they came on in the same old way, and we sent them back in the same old way. So the last thing I'm going to leave you with, if you think about my pointing out that the Soviets and the Iraqis use the same equipment and the same tactics, and our adversaries in security use the same equipment and the same tactics, if we learn how to defeat them, we can give the same answer as Wellington gave. They're not invincible. We just haven't figured it out yet. So apply the concepts. This is going to be really fast, but because I've talked a lot about it already, but the concepts that are going to let us give that answer. Integrated defenses and coordinated processes. So when the Army is defending a piece of terrain, they don't just put one line out there and say, everybody defend this. They don't take 1 million soldiers and line them up along the Mexican border, equally spaced out and say, okay, defend the border, right? Because then if you're the bad guy, you concentrate everything at one spot and you go right through them. Instead, you have integrated defenses where you have the ability to do reconnaissance and see where things are happening, and reserves that you can move to the point of weakness, etc. And they coordinate the processes between the different teams that are involved in this. And the capabilities we need to have should be resilient. That is, we can't become overwhelmed and then start being degraded and unable to do what we're doing. As we deal with defending, securing our systems, we need to be resilient to those things that will tend to wear us down. Whether it's the difficulty of change within your organization, or it's the capability of your adversary, or it's the fact that you have to renew your systems every 2 years, or whatever it is. And we need trained and capable staff. If we don't have trained and capable staff, we have a real problem. And right now, in information security, we have, in some skill sets, we have 0% unemployment, which is a problem, not a good thing. I know it sounds like a good thing when you're getting paid more money, but in the long run, if we don't have enough people to fill the jobs that we need to fill, it's a real problem. So we need to solve that, for sure. You need to build your processes before the battle, not afterwards or not during. That is, if you anticipate that you will have to respond to a security incident, you need to build the processes for incident management before the security incident happens, not on the fly as it's happening. Practice operational security. I cannot tell you how many times I have had people in the information security field start describing how they, for example, harden their servers. In public locations, like a bar after a conference, while they're drinking, and you don't know who's sitting there. It's okay to talk about the fact that you harden your systems, but don't describe exactly how you do it. Don't respond to an email from a recruiter that you all know that there's been a significant increase in the number of recruiter contacts to information security people. I don't know if you knew that or not, but there has been. And a lot of these recruiters aren't recruiters. We're not quite sure what sort of information, why they're gathering the information yet, but they are gathering information. So when a recruiter calls you up and contacts you on LinkedIn and then has a phone call with you, do some due diligence on them before you start telling them about what a great job you do at your current company and how you do it. And last concept that we really need to think about is having the best gear within your constraints. Okay, not the best gear possible, period, because that's not possible. Or as the Army says, you go to war with the gear you have. You're going to come as you're equipped. You're not going to get a chance to buy a bunch of great gear. So everybody remembers kind of 10 years or so ago when we had people in Iraq that didn't have the latest and greatest body armor, but they were still there fighting. You may not have the latest and greatest firewall, for example, but you still have a firewall, and you need to make it the best possible firewall. And come on, guys, be a pirate, okay? Seriously. Remember what I talked about, what Captain Jack Sparrow was. Be a pirate. That's the last lesson I'll leave you with. Be a little bit different. Be ruthless. Live by your code. Be a strong individual. And you will be successful. Thanks.